Before I get any further down my path, I just want to say that it's about the journey. You're going to hear me talk about this a few times today, and the fact that so many people are trying to rush to get to a place, and they don't realize that there's only so much you could do to speed things up, and you got to enjoy the journey. You got to just realize that the journey is an important part of the process. And if you didn't do this, you can't do that later. And that's what I'm going to kind of go through now a little bit as far as my use of photography and all that stuff. So after being raised in Miami, I went to school in Rochester Institute of Technology, where I studied advertising photography. So I didn't go to like a special arts high school. I didn't do anything like that. I literally studied, learned photography in school after I had just been kind of taking pictures as a hobby, oh yes. And by the way, we are recording the Zoom. So everybody, so that this is being recorded. So anyway, I went from Miami to Rochester. This is exactly what RIT looks like in the winter. It's a beautiful place. And it forced me to go inside. Originally I was like, I want to be like a fashion photographer with like sexy men and women everywhere and like at the beach. And that's kind of what I knew, because, being raised in Miami, I'm like, oh, like if you're a photographer, you shoot weddings, quinceañeras, or you shoot that. That was all my bubble was exposed to. But then going to this in the freezing cold, I went inside to a studio for the first time in my whole life. I was there only 2 years because I transferred in and I graduated. I moved to New York City, and I'm like, I'm going to assist other photographers. I'm going to learn the business and pay my dues and all those things that you've probably all heard many, many times. And with that, I was like, I graduated college and I'm like, I want to be a travel photographer. Not even kidding. Like literally that was like my portfolio. Like I want to be a travel photographer. And, I pulled up some of my old imagery to share with you just so you have an idea of what that looked like, right? So this is the early 2000s. I was shooting film on a Hasselblad mostly. So there's a lot of square pictures that weren't cropped square, they were shot square. So one of my big eye-opening moments where this travel thing came from was like, I went to Cuba because the school that I was going to at RIT led a trip to Cuba to do photography specifically. So I went around, and I'm Cuban, so this was such an amazing experience for me to talk to other real Cuban people that aren't my parents and my family, and get their input on Fidel and Castro and all the stuff, right? So, I went into cigar factories and I shot. I found people on the street that I photographed. We went out into the country. I was in the city. I really, and people literally let me into their houses and they're like, yeah, come on in, I'll make you some coffee. Like, I don't know you, but you're American and you seem cool. So it was amazing. That people just took me in as their own almost, and they almost had nothing to themselves. So with that, this guy's like, my mom, my sister just had a baby, come to the hospital with me and photograph her with the baby. And it was just really insane experience for me, leaving college and being like, I want to travel, I want to meet real people, and then slowly I started doing pictures like this, where it's like, oh, okay, there's the people. Oh, wait, they're the things too. And that's kind of what I loved about the travel photography, is it was the people, the places, the things, the food, it was the full experience, So I started looking at the spaces, and I really love these just really simple, clean, beautiful compositions. But this is part of my journey. This is where I started exploring photography. And I think if I hadn't done this stuff, I would definitely not be where I'm at today. And then I also got to go to Mexico for the Day of the Dead. So we went through all these different towns and cemeteries, and we shot all these different things there as well. And that was also, once again, an amazing experience, just me exploring the world with a camera. And I feel like that's where a lot of people get started. It's just oh, I got this camera, I got this iPhone, whatever it is, whatever your camera is, and just going out and experiencing the world and seeing it for yourself. And then I kind of came back to Rochester, and I was like, oh, okay, and to the US, and I'm like, how do I make interesting images here, right? Because everyone's like, oh, you gotta travel to Cuba or Mexico, whatever. So these are kind of some images that I made in the US. So this is in Savannah, Georgia. this is out west, where it's just like, I was just things that would catch my eye or that were interesting to me is just like what I was all over. This is in Idaho, I think it was, the Craters of the Moon National Park. This is in Minneapolis. So like I gave myself the goal of like, I want to see all 50 states. I only made it to 49, but North Dakota, I'm coming for you. So I traveled around, and I like anytime I wasn't working assisting photographers, I used the money I was making and I just found a cheap air, ticket, like, oh, okay, there's a cheap ticket to Alaska. All right, I'm going to go to Alaska for a week and stay at a hostel and, do whatever it took for me to just, I wanted to travel. This was in the Rochester Institute of Technology parking lot one night when I got out of class, and I'm just like, whoa, there's this crazy fog. And I shot this shot. This is also in upstate New York. So, I mean, that same kind of thing I did, when I traveled, I also brought to the States. These are my friends' brothers that are Mormon and have a huge farm in Utah or in Nevada. And they're like, you want to come shoot ground squirrels with us? I'm like, sure. And I think when I think back at the journey, so much of it was about saying yes instead of no, and I think, and say yes right now, not like, oh yeah, someday I want to come out to Nevada and I'll meet your brothers. It's like, great. What are you doing 2 weeks from now? Like, and I'll get to that a little bit more in the work that I do today too, and how I kind of ended up here. Then I started getting hired to do these jobs. So like, Budget Travel Magazine would send me like to Key West or California or different places. So this was like a home for lost chickens and roosters in Key West, because there's a lot of street chickens. And then, I don't want to spend too much time on this stuff, but this kind of gives you the idea of what I did with America. And then I changed my mind. I was like, so while this was happening, I realized like, no, I don't want to be never home. I don't want to always be in a different country. I don't want to always be like, the turning point for me is like went to a Caribbean island for a magazine, and I was there for 48 hours and I never got to like step on the beach. It was like, it's work, it's a job. And once I realized that, I'm like, oh, well, there's way better ways for me to be a creative person in, closer to home. So that's where I kind of started this transition of being like more of a food and still life photographer. So with that, I started doing work like this, which is so completely different. I shot catalog work for Johnson Murphy, for Victoria's Secret, for Petrosian Caviar, for a bunch of different people. And, it came natural to me. Like I had seen so much of the world and understood lighting, and these compositions to me came natural. And in this also, like my ability to art direct and understand good styling is where it was kind of created, right? Like, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I did the lighting, but if you don't get the set design right, or you don't get the arrangement of the apples just right, or you don't, think about how it all kind of comes together, like doing a bedroom set like this is a totally fake set. Like this is not a real bedroom, like where you're thinking about every shape and every piece. And without that, I can't do the work I do today, so a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to do that. I just want to do this. But sometimes there's a lot of things you need to do before you could do the thing you really want to do, So I think there's something to be said about different life experiences to help you get where you want to get. And then there's, Godiva catalog too. I forgot about that that was like a whole part of my life as well. But slowly as you see, they started changing from like more found things to more like kind of created worlds, right? Like here it wasn't just like, oh, the pretty chocolate. Like here is literally, we painted the whole set and we kind of came up with this whole idea. So slowly things like ideas started coming out of my head that weren't just like, hey, I found this and I found that, so I got into doing more advertising. So, this is all work I was doing as a still photographer towards the end of my, still photographer career. I still do stills today, but obviously, as you all know me, I do a lot of video. So I did all these kinds of ads. And then as you see, like it really shifted to being a little more controlled and a little more effects and a little more like manipulation. And which was really exciting to me to like, okay, I've seen the world. Now I want to create my own world. And that's where, things really started to change for me, as a creative entrepreneur, where, I ran a perfectly successful business as a still photographer, shooting catalog and all those things. But like I was built to do more. I had to, I had abilities that I wasn't applying in the work I was doing. Even at this level as a still photographer, I was like, there's more I could do. These are cool stills that we did with like a microscope lens. This is like the inside of a tomato, almost like cell. This is like part of a pickle. And then I started even getting hired to do things incorporating with CGI. So like I had such a good technical understanding of how cameras worked and everything that like I could shoot not just delicious food, but also integrate that with CG elements as stills. And it was super fun, but then something happened. Basically, I kind of felt like trapped in that I kind of reached, like I wasn't feeling challenged enough anymore, and I think this happens to a lot of people, right? You set a goal, you reach the goal, you're like, oh, but now I have a new bar and I have a new bar and I have a new bar, and you keep raising that bar, so I reached that point with still photography where it's just like, this is too easy, not easy necessarily, but it wasn't challenging me enough. So actually I'm going to change the sequence of this because this, I think, sorry, one second. Yeah. So here we go. So basically, as they call it, the call to engineering kind of fell on my head. I was from this family of engineers. Like I always grew up tinkering with things with my family, but I was like, I'm the artist. I'm going to go travel the world and do this. But slowly, as my photography style changed and I started getting into more of this technical stuff, like I found myself going more and more to engineering. And part of that is also when I was kind of getting bored of still photography. So I got a whole bunch of new hobbies. So I basically started taking classes at night. I would shoot during the day, catalog and all the stuff I was doing. And I started taking all these classes. So woodworking, welding, electronic circuits, power supplies, Arduino, film, filmmaking. I had never shot video before. So I actually took a 16mm film class at SVA. So over a period of probably like 2 years, I was taking all these classes and doing research on YouTube and just trying to figure out like, what can I do that was more than what I was just doing? Because like when I say, when your hobby becomes your career, you need a new hobby, is what I tell people. Because it's like, I used to be the guy that brought a camera with me everywhere because that was my hobby. But once it was my job, I didn't want to do that on the weekends and carry the camera and go everywhere, So I found these new hobbies. And then I started thinking like, how do I bring this together? And, this is what we're going to talk a little bit about in a moment with you guys about figuring out what your superpower is, which we'll come back to that in a second, where it's just like, I'm good at photography. I want to get into cinematography because I was like, the moving image was really getting exciting to me. I want to incorporate this technology and this building stuff all together. And so for me, where this all kind of changed was I was doing this job for Budweiser and I was like, I think this could be better if it was moving, so this job inspired the burger drop video that I did that many of you have seen that went viral. Is actually the behind the scenes that went viral of this. Because I was like, I could do that shot better and it's so much cooler with video and slow motion. And I kind of fell into the robot thing with that. Because I was like, okay, how do I bring all these things together? And this is kind of where my, the things really started to changing. And as you can see now, you're like, oh, okay, now this path for Steve makes sense coming from the still photography. He took all these weird classes. He learned how to do all this stuff. He built this crazy contraption that did the burger drop thing. And like, it was basically using modern technology to solve visual problems is what I kind of told myself was what I was trying to do. It's like, I'm not just telling visual stories, but I was telling stories that solved, like using technology to do cooler things than before. So that's where I, went into visual engineering. It just made sense. I'm using engineering to make visual things. And as you all know, that's how I am here today. That everything we do at the garage is based around visual engineering. I still do still photography, but I couldn't do this level of complexity of work if I wasn't good at styling. I wasn't good at running a business. I wasn't good at putting a team together. All the things from my history culminate in what I do today. And I think that's a really hard thing about visual engineering. It's not just like taking a good picture. It's like so many things. And with the garage learning, that's what we're trying to teach you all, is all the different parts that I had to go through to make the work we do. So taking it off of me, sorry that took a little bit of time, but I thought it's really interesting for you guys to hear how I got here, to understand how you're going to get to where you want to go. So I'm going to talk about all of you now. So how should your path be? Should I go to photo school? Should I do what Steve did? No, like the big thing is that, you guys all have to find your own path. And here are some tips that I kind of want to talk about as far as things that you have to do to try to get success in your own world, and things that you need to think about for yourself, whether you're starting a regular business, a creative business, like anything. I think a lot of people get really caught on, I'll do that someday, and they never really do that thing, So number one rule is you can't be afraid to fail. Failure happens all the time, every day, even today in the work that we do. If you're not failing, you're not trying enough new things. You're not pushing yourself hard enough. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to get into trying to do that because I don't think it's going to turn out good, and oh, it's not going to be good, and no one's going to like it, or what's the point? Like, what do people care? So I think number one is like, you just got to put that aside. If you fail, well, at least you tried something new. You could say, hey, that didn't work out, but I really thought it could be cool. So now I learned this, and then the next time I do it, I'm going to be that much smarter, and the next time even smarter, and so on and so forth. So that's like big rule number one. The big thing you need to ask yourself is like, what motivates you? Like, what are you most passionate about? It isn't like, oh, I love what Steve works, I'm going to copy what Steve works because I'm just like passionate about that. But no, like you personally, like when I was into travel, I did travel photography. When I was into, food, I did food stills. When I, and that's constantly changing. Like only a few years ago, I wasn't doing anything with robots. So, like realize like when you're really passionate about something and you're really motivated at something, is where you're going to do the best work that you could do. Whether it's something you can make money or not, that's a little more of a challenge for you to figure out. Everybody I ever knew that was doing what they're the most passionate about, the money always kind of worked its way out, because people like want to hire people that are passionate, like they want to see my like excitement for this pizza job or whatever job that we're bidding to do or whatever it is. If I'm not into the job, a lot of times I won't get the job because it shows that like, I'm like, oh, it's like really fashion-y, or I don't really understand, that fragrance or what the client wants. Like, if I don't get it and I'm not just like all into it, then I'm probably not the right person for the job. Not to say sometimes I might not get those jobs just because it's still going to be a good end result because, my skills and everything I've done. But for you out there, just think about like what motivates you, what would get you up every day to go do it if you're even doing it for free, and then once you start there, try to refine that and find, what we started talking about a little bit earlier about like, what's your superpower? Like what makes you unique, compared to somebody else? Because I think a lot of people are just like, oh, I take great pictures. Yeah. And I'm really nice. And the models love me, whatever it is. Like, that's not enough, like you have to really, and this is hard. This is one that takes time to really be, understand yourself and what you're capable of. And, it's like, oh, I'm really good at cinematography, but I'm also into technology. So that's how I ended up where I'm at. I could have, if I was just into cinematography, then, oh, I'm also really into food. So, things like that. Like, if you're passionate about fashion or beauty, then, try to incorporate that into what you do. If you like to crochet and be really crafty and artsy, like use that as a tool that you use in the stories that you try to tell. Because just being a cinematographer is not enough. Like, you have to find what else, right? Because that's the differentiator. That's what makes you unique than somebody else, right? So I think there's a lot of time that should be spent just thinking about internally about what your superpower is and how that makes you unique. So once you kind of have that figured out, there's there's three pillars that I say to being a creative entrepreneur, in a lot of different ways, but basically there's the creative side, there's a technical side, and there's a business side. And with that, it's pretty equally balanced in importance, right? So if you're just two of them, I'm really creative, I'm really technical, but you can't run a business, you're never gonna get paid to do your creative technical thing. You know, if you're really good at business, but you don't, and you're really technical, but there's no creativity, then how are you unique from somebody else? You know, so really thinking to yourself as far as where you fill down in each of these boxes, where your skills are and what you need to work on. Because so if you're like, oh, I'm really creative and I'm really good at business, then maybe you could find a partner that's really good at the technical stuff, or you hire a crew that's really technical that helps you execute. There's nothing that says that all these things have to be you, but at the very beginning of any business, it is all you. You know, when you get started, you're not going to be able to hire a bunch like a business manager and a DP and gaffer that are all amazing, and like the first jobs, all the first stuff you do, you are the creative entrepreneur. You're the person that's doing that. So even if you're a chef, right? The creative is the food. Technical is also how the food's prepared on time, still all warm, comes together, and then that's great. You cook for yourself at home or for your friends, but if you want to run a business of it, that changes everything. So this really applies to a lot of different creative entrepreneurial, tasks. Same thing. If you're a wedding photographer, how are your pictures different? Is it just, oh, technically, because I have a better lighting? That might, not to say that if you didn't have all three of these be super high, you can still be successful, but it means that one of those things have to be really, really strong. Like you're like amazing marketing, amazing business person. You find a way to like get in front of everybody, and you're really good on social media. So maybe you don't have to be that creative, but your stuff is technically good. So people are like, oh, okay, I'm happy with that. So, something to always keep in mind. I think a lot of artists are like really good at the creative stuff, and then the other two fall off. Or I think a lot of photographers are like get really caught up on the technical stuff, like, oh, this camera, this f-stop, this light, this whatever, and they don't think about the creative enough or the business enough. So I can't stress this, right? This page right here is the nuts and bolts of everything that you need to think about. The details come under all these three pillars, but just keep that in mind, right? So talking about the third one there, right? Like, how do I run a business? I don't know how to run a business. Well, I didn't know how to run a business either. I think some things have to be learned. I learned a lot by assisting and apprenticing other photographers, because I saw how they ran their businesses. My dad was a small business owner, so I was around that my whole life, as seeing like how he would like say like, oh, we can't spend money on these things because like we don't have the money, and just how to balance money and all those things. So, and you could take a class, like all the technical classes I took in, cinema, in like welding and all that stuff. There's plenty of places where you could take a basic business class, even online. You don't even have to like go to college to do it. And it's something that's learned. And I think it's something that for a lot of artists is really hard. So something that you really have to learn how to do is run the business side of things if you want to be not just a creative person, but a creative entrepreneur. And this is a good practice that I want to share with you, that, for a lot of people, trying to find focus is a big challenge as to like why your business is different than another one. So I always say like, hey, why don't you build a basic business plan? And of course, people are like, I don't know how to build a business plan. Well, I'm going to show you right now. The most basic business plan you could do in 5 minutes, as long as you know the answers to the questions. You might need to take more time to figure out the answers. But like a really popular thing that companies do, like Amazon, as an example, before they produce a new product, let's say like, web hosting or whatever, the cloud or whatever they do at Amazon Web Services, they always start with a press release. So with that is just these basic 5 things. What does the the company or the product do? What's the problem it's trying to solve? How is it unique from the competition? What are the product, this is, I guess, more the business, the business plan, but what are your products and services, and what is your cost of doing the business? So for the press release, it's really just, kind of the first 3 here, which is just like, what do you do? What are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do for people? And how is it unique? So it's like this TV remote is unique because it fits in your hand nicely. Other remotes that don't have, volume buttons that are as nice as these, whatever it is. Like, just think about every product that exists, and you have to be able to do this for yourself as a company, right? You are the company at the beginning. So, what do you want to shoot? Oh, I want to shoot food and beverage, slow motion video, robot shots. Why do you need to do them that way? Oh, well, with the robot and motion control and slow motion, it really brings the food to life and makes it exciting. It makes, this milk brand stand out from the other milk brand, whatever it is. So, keep that in mind. And, are there other people doing it? Yeah, probably there's probably doing something similar, but that's where the more you could realize how unique your work is, the more that you're going to stand out from the competition and be able to explain to a potential client why to hire you versus somebody else. And with that, do you want to just be a director that works with a production company? The production company handles all their production for them. They hire the stage, they hire the crew. Or do you want to run your own production company as a director? Or there's everything in between. Do you do your own post-production because you're really good at post-production, or do you not? So, and with that is like, you have to make money at this, right? If you're going to run a business. So trying to figure out what your cost of doing business is. So this is basically, you have to figure out the minimum you need to make on any day that you're shooting to be able to support your lifestyle. So people are like, well, how many days of shooting? Well, that's the first thing you have to be realistic about. So for us, like for when I think about what my cost of doing business is, it's like, it's like, okay, I hope that I'm going to shoot 5 days every month for clients. So basically all the money I'm going to make for the month has to happen in 5 days, not in the 30 days of the month. So, okay, if I have to pay rent for, $10,000 and I have to pay $10,000 in equipment and whatever it is, let's say, it's 40,000, let's make it an easier number. So I need to make, $50,000 a month to be able to pay for all the overhead and the crew and everything that's going to be. Okay, so in 5 days of shooting, that means I have to charge an average of $10,000 a day for shoots to be able to make that happen, right? It's kind of A plus B. It's pretty straightforward. With that, keep in mind, all your expenses, right? Like, oh, okay, $50,000. Oh, wait, but now I got to pay taxes, and then so you got to kind of broaden the scope a little bit. But if you're just trying to kind of get a general idea of like, how much do I charge, which we get asked all the time, that's one way to come up with it. It's just like, hey, for you to be a business, and in that you also have to calculate like putting money away for savings, because maybe you only shoot 3 days 1 month, or you shoot no days 1 month. So like, oh, okay, maybe I should put a buffer of another 25% for savings. In there, you have to put in, for, oh, wait, I want to save some money over time for retirement, or to buy a house, or whatever it is. And think a little bit ahead, not be like, I just graduated college, I have like no expenses, I live with my parents, so I don't need to make any money. Like be realistic about what the market would be if you didn't live with your parents and you had to pay for everything, because that, like, if you're just charging almost nothing, you're hurting the industry in that you're not charging fair wages of what, things would have to cost if you weren't just had this opportunity that other people didn't. Or eventually, what are you going to be living with your parents when you're 50? Like you got, and you can't change those habits overnight. Like suddenly, if you're like, oh, I was only charging $500 a day, and now, oh wow, I need to figure something out and live on my own, and whatever it is, now I need $5,000 a day. Clients aren't going to change overnight like that. So these are all things that you really need to kind of try to factor in, realizing that you can't just go from here to here, right? So there's definitely something in between that. So so how do you get started? So the key to starting any creative business is to start it. I think too many people wait and they're like, oh, let me think about it a little more. Let me think a little bit. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm not ready. I don't have a robot yet. Oh, I don't have a fancy camera yet. It's like, start with what you have. Well, look around. What do you have in your garage? What do you have in your pocket? Like, can you work with that? Can you do some smaller videos that might not pay as much and kind of get you started? So, with that, basically, these are kind of the steps of how I've gotten to where I'm at as a creative business, basically. So there's the first stage is like testing, playing, proof of concept. For me, it was traveling around the world, oh, magazines want to pay me to do that. That's amazing. But I started just doing it myself, right? I just went out there and started taking pictures because I loved it. It was what I was passionate about. So do that about what you're passionate about. So, before anybody could possibly consider hiring you, you got to show them what you do, right? So this is what I call the testing / proof of concept phase. So, let's say you want to be a tabletop cinematographer. Well, hey, start shooting some tabletop cinematography, with your iPhone in your garage, whatever it is, but okay, well, I got to edit that together. Okay, I got to figure out editing and sound and all those things. So, you got to get started, whether you go to a full school for that, whether you just sign up for the garage learning courses, whatever it is you do, you have to put in that work first, and the same thing I had to do when I went from still photography into video. I had to do a whole bunch of video testing work to all over again. Like I had to just, that's the cycle of life, right? Is like, oh, I had to shoot a test or a bunch of tests, put an edit together. And then you move to the next phase, which is like getting your first jobs and where you really kind of learn how the business works. So with that, it's like, oh, okay, I got, somebody pay me $200 to make a video for their social media for their restaurant, okay, cool. And then, now I had that video, I showed it to the next restaurant. They're like, oh, we'll pay you $1,000 to make a video for our restaurant. And you build that. It's this slow. Sometimes it feels like it's not moving, like you're like, oh, I'm just doing all these free, cheap jobs, try to get some experience, which is sometimes people confuse that with the testing phase. The reality is like, there are going to be free jobs that you're going to do, but it should be for you to show what you're capable of and what you're pushing your creative. A lot of people just jump into like doing free jobs for clients right away, where they're doing the client's creative, not their own. And I think it's a tricky balance there. Like sometimes you definitely have to do some of both. But I think it's really interesting to keep that in mind. And in that, by doing these first jobs, you learn the business too. Like whether if you haven't had a chance to apprentice for somebody else, like by doing jobs, you're going to learn like, oh, wow, that took 6 hours instead of, I thought it was just going to take 2 hours. Oh, I got to charge for more time. Or oh, wow, I used, back in the day of film, it's like, oh, I used, 10 rolls of film, not 2. So I got to charge them more. Or now with digital, it's like, oh, right, the client said, oh, yeah, well, where's the hard drive with the footage? Oh, I didn't charge them for a hard drive. And now I got to pay out of my pocket to get on my hard drive. So these are all the things you learn in those jobs. And then, basically from there on, it's just refining. Like literally, I'm still in the refining stage. Every single day, you're refining again, refining again. And if you decide to change direction, then you're repeating this whole process all over again. You're coming up with your business plan, you're testing again, you're doing your first jobs again. So when I went from still photography into video, like I was starting at the beginning of this, when I went, okay, great, I'm telling regular video stories. Oh, wait, I want to do crazy motion control slow motion. Well, I need to have crazy motion control slow motion in my portfolio or my reel to show this to people. So, and with this is realizing that this is the journey. This is the part of the process. I call it's a double ultra marathon, not a sprint. It takes a lot of time to get good at stuff. So you might as well enjoy the ride, and realize that, you're not going to get from here to here overnight. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of, effort, putting one foot in front of the other, on the days where you're defeated, where you're like, oh, I tried so hard to get that job, I didn't get it, or that job went really well, really horribly. And nobody likes I only got 100 likes on my Instagram post, whatever it is. There's a lot of places to find failure in what you're doing, but realize that that's just part of the process. To get to where you want to go, you need to go through the process and enjoy those rides and always be looking forward to, learning something new, because everything you learn will make your day tomorrow that much better. And it will make you as a human being stronger, more resilient, and better at what you're trying to be, and with that is also community. Like I think a lot of people kind of get in their own head and in their own bubble. And I feel like finding either a group of other people that are trying to do the same thing, either friends that you could bounce your work off of, or peers that, reach out to, people reach out to me and they're like, hey, Steve, can you take a look at, this job I did? And I might give them, 2 sentences of feedback, like, oh, did you think about, making that, instead of a 1-minute video, a 15-second video, because I feel like it's way too long, like just getting feedback from people And at the end of the day, you got to trust your gut as far as to what feedback you listen to. You'd be running around with like a chicken with no head if you listen to any feedback anybody got you, because like, oh, that person thought it was great, that person thought it was horrible. Like, it's definitely something that you need to consider. And early on, it's hard because like, oh, well, Steve said it should be a 15-second. That must be right. And maybe it is, but it's something that you need to always be gauging for yourself. Like, are you being true to your vision of whatever you're trying to do? Do you think it's awesome? Do you think it needs more work? Do you think it could be better? And with that, I think having a community of people, whether real people in real life, or online, which, is a lot of what we're building with Garage Learning. There's a big social aspect to the website when it launches very soon, where you could share work with other people and they'll give you feedback. And, you could get feedback from a lot of people, which I think is really important for growth. So that was a lot about me. It was a lot about you and what you should do and businesses and all these sort of things. And with that, I want to open it up for questions, and Chris is going to read them out. I'm going to try to say them back to them. I'm getting better and better at this. And yeah, what do we got? What do we get? Throw on the way, and throw them into the chat if you have questions that I have not answered yet. Okay, no questions yet. All right, well, let's throw some questions at us. As far as anything about the business, even if it's about the previous Jaeger talks we've done, anything about my history, the hurdles I had, any of those things. Open game for anybody that has any questions. No? Quiet?
Not yet.
All right.
How do you look for pain points for the client project?
Okay, so how do I look for pain points with a client in a client project? A lot of it comes from experience. And that's where I'm saying, like, those first jobs is you learning, right? Like until you realize that something might be a problem, you're not going to think about it, right? You're like, oh yeah, we'll shoot it. It'll be great. I have my camera. I don't need any other people. I don't need a food stylist. Like the chef said that, the chef's gonna, like that's what you learn from every job, right? Every job you're gonna learn something new. You got to smile and grin and get through the day and try to make that client as happy as possible. But with that, the pain points, the more you could pre-think those, the happier the client's going to be, the happier you're going to be at the end of the day, the more accurate your estimate's going to be, all those things. But with that, at the beginning, like, once again, you just need to go through that process to figure it out. The one thing I have to say with that is like, it is how you conduct yourself in a situation where a client isn't quite like, you're like, oh, was expecting one thing and you're in a different situation. Like, no matter what, you got to just get through that day and try to make the client as happy as possible, whether you lose money on it, whatever it is. You just can't, basically just say, well, I'm out of here, like, no go, because it's on you to ask all these questions, and I think at first a lot of people don't ask enough questions to clients. Like, oh, okay, well, you said you want to see, whatever, how many pieces of food in the shot? Oh, I didn't realize, like, you need a whole table. Oh, we need to bring the table. It's not a table that's, like the big part of our client process on any job is like 1,000 questions, and oftentimes the client's like, oh, we haven't thought about that. Oh, we haven't thought about that. Like, there's a lot of that and a lot of calls to talk through it all. But there's never anything wrong with asking a whole bunch of questions at first because it's better to have more answers than less.
And what if you haven't figured out your superpower yet? Can you still run a business and figure it out later?
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, let me repeat the question. So for people that, don't feel like they figured out their superpower yet, right? Can you still run a successful business? Yeah, I mean, I did it as a still photographer for, 10, 15 years before I really kind of figured it out, right? Like, I just literally share that with you. Like, it takes a long time, a lot of life experiences sometimes to figure this out. Some people have a natural thing. They're like, hey, I'm really into cinematography and airplanes. I want to be an aerial cinematographer. Like, done, but then with that, maybe they're like, oh, but I'm really into cities and urban planning. And like, I really love how, cities are designed. So like, I'm going to be a city, urban, aerial cinematographer, so the more fine that your passions get, the more you could laser focus on what you're really good at. And yeah, you know, once again, starting out, I didn't even know I needed a superpower or realize that I needed a superpower. Like, you know, it wasn't only until later on that it's like, wait, I have this other thing that I'm really passionate about and I really love doing, and it has nothing to do with this thing I'm doing over here. It was only when I could like really join them together that's like, phew, you know, suddenly it was easy. It made sense. Clients loved it because they're like, oh my God, like Steve's so crazy because like he could do all these things, like, you know. So I think, you know, realize that it takes time, but it's something you should always be trying to think about. And that, I'm trying to kind of speed up that process for you all out there, realizing that it's something you should be thinking about. Nobody ever told me like, you know, they're like, oh, just take good pictures and be nice to your clients. Like nobody was like, oh, but to be better at taking pictures and to be more creative and to be more, you know, Steve, you know, as to what I should be doing, think about what else I'm really good at.
And how do you establish yourself in a specific space? For example, the beverage industry.
So somebody's asking, how do you establish yourself in a particular space, like the beverage industry? Start shooting beverages. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you got to start doing what you want to be doing, right? In those testing shoots and all the things that you're gonna be doing, you have to start doing it. Like I wanted to shoot slow motion liquids. Well, I had to find a way. I used my day rates as a still photography to rent the Phantom camera and to start shooting slow motion beverage shots so that I could get slow motion beverage work. Nowadays, there's things like the Chronos camera that I probably would have tried to buy back then, which is like a $5,000, 1,000 frame a second slow motion camera, or there's the Free Fly Wave, which is like a $10,000 one. I would have found a way to beg, borrow, and steal to either rent that for some days or borrow it from a friend. I luckily had found a friend that had a Phantom that he would like rent to me on a discount when he was out of town. So yeah, so I think to try to put yourself in a particular industry, A, start shooting that work, and then B, see how your work is different than the other people in that industry, and make sure it's, you know, if you really want to start getting the jobs, make sure it's better than the other things out there. I try to stay away from, oh, I'm better because I'm cheaper. You know, I think when you're really young, maybe some of that's okay, but I think keep in mind that, you know, eventually you want to get to this point, and if you just keep yourself down here, you're just not going to get there financially. So I think, you know, always kind of push to the limits of what your worth is. There's definitely a little like fake it till you make it that happens. You know, there's plenty of times that like they're like, oh, Steve, have you shot, you know, whatever before? I'm like, yeah, I've shot, yeah, totally, you know. And you know, you figure it out, like, you know, like early on in my career, they're like, oh, have you shot shoes before? I'm like, I've never shot shoes in my life. So I went and got some shoes and I brought them in and I shot shoes, and then like, here's a shoe portfolio, and I got jobs from that for years. So, you know, it's a little bit of all of it, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to do what you want to be paid to do, or do what you want to do, be hired to do, you know.
Well, this one combines a couple of questions.
Oh, good.
And it's, you know, how do you find new clients? Is there anything better than a cold outreach? Like, what's the trick?
Okay, how do you, this is like probably our number 2 question we get on Instagram. Like, how do you find new clients? Well, we've covered a lot of the first one, which is do something really well and target that thing that you do really well, you know, because honestly, so many clients come to me just from our social media, because I'm just like, if we're not shooting a job, like we're shooting a test. I'm always being creative and putting stuff out there that of exactly like, you know, of the things I want to be paid to do. Like, oh, I never shot pizza before, so I did a pizza test and now I got bids for pizza jobs. So, you know, that's definitely a big part of that. What was the question again? I just want to make sure.
You know, besides for
Oh, to get the clients. Yes. Yeah. You know, so there's 2 sides of this one, right? There's you going to a client and there's a client coming to you. So you want to develop as many reasons for a client to come to you, you know, such as having an awesome, you know, social media presence, you know, getting an article written about you because you did something really cool, you know, being really good at PR and marketing. So that's one way where like you're just putting stuff out in the world is sharing it, and other cinematographers are seeing it and like, oh, okay, you need a food guy. Well, oh, Steve's good at the food thing. Because I get a lot of jobs that just come from referrals where people just like other cinematographers that love my work or other creative directors I work with. And with that, anytime you do a job for somebody or anybody reaches out to you that like, oh, I really love your work, like stay in touch with that person forever. Those people are gold for your whole history as whatever it is that you're going to be doing. You know, some of my first clients, like I still talk to today, you know, like, and I think that, you know, that's the difference between getting hired to do one job and to do multiple jobs and make a career out of this, you know. So the second side of that, so that's like you doing work, putting it out there. The other one is that direct outreach, right? The direct outreach is a lot harder. People are really busy, people are really overworked, people have a lot going on. You know, people have like myself have a rep that goes out and knocks on people's doors, and you know, and they, you know, we still don't get hired or even called back from them, you know. So like realize that like that direct reach out is incredibly challenging. But you know, that's how I honestly that's how I started. So like I moved to New York City, I had like a printed portfolio, and I went to this magazine, Savira magazine, and they like I dropped off the portfolio for the photo editor, which I like looked on the byline of the magazine, and she called me in and she's like, I love your portfolio. And, you know, they started hiring me. So, you know, like, but there's also a lot of places I dropped off a portfolio and who knows if they even looked at it. I would actually start hiding little papers in the portfolio in a certain spot to see if like, oh, if they opened it and if it had moved or not. And like half the time, you know, nobody looked at the book, you know? So, you know, that's a little bit of a hit or miss thing, you know, not to say not to do it. Like we do direct emails to clients. Some clients might read our emails for 5 years and still not hire us, but that 6th year, they just happened to get the right job for me and it worked out. So, I mean, I think number one though is do great work and put it out there for the world. You know, I think for better or worse, social media has made it easier for that to happen, you know, and websites, like when I literally started as an assistant, like the idea of having a photography website was like a new thing. Yeah, yes, I'm older now. But like, keep in mind that before you had to literally knock on somebody's door and drop off a physical portfolio. Now it's easy to send emails, but with that, I think to be the most successful is make it personal. You know, like say, hey, I've been reading your magazine for months, or, oh, hey, I love the work that, you know, Pizza Hut's been doing. You know, I think, you know, here, let me show this spot that I did and, you know, kind of where I think I would love to take Pizza Hut next for their next campaign. So, you know, realize that they need to have something to gain from it. If it's only you that has something to gain from this situation, that is not great, right? You know, like they're looking for solutions to their problems and you should be that solution, you know? So the more it could be personal and directly targeted, the better for those direct reach out. I would say people like, hey, email 10 people a week, right? Every day, email 2 people and make it personal. And if you keep doing that every week, day after day, and stay at it and don't drop it suddenly when you're like, oh, I got really busy for 3 months and I didn't email anybody. Like it's really about like what I call like planting seeds, you know, like you have to plant the seed and every day you got to water it and the tree starts growing and it might take 5 years for that tree to bear fruit, at which point you get a job, right? But if you stop watering that seed, that it dies and you got to start all over again. So something to keep in mind there, where it's just like, you know, if you're going to do these direct reach outs, you got to make it personal. You got to keep like, and people want to work with people they like, right? So you got to be somebody they like, you got to be friendly, but like authentically, right? And you like authentically want to work for them, not just like anybody that's going to hire you because you emailed everybody. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Cool, we got time for one more, so I'm gonna try and combine some. There's a lot of people asking when they first get started, how much do they know how to charge? And also, how much money do you need to get started?
You know, I graduated college with a camera and a computer. And that's it. That's all I had, right? I didn't have a job yet, you know, so I started working for other photographers and I basically tell people first, like, you need some money, right? You need to have a job. The job isn't going to be doing robotic slow motion stuff right away. Like whether it's like you're a postal delivery person or you work for UPS or for Amazon, whatever it is, just when you start out, you have to have a roof over your head. You have to be able to eat, put food on the table. And then you do this on the side, right? It starts as a hobby, right? And you got to get beyond the hobby level before you could start saying, hey, I'm going to quit my job, or I'm going to go part-time because I think I can start making money doing this. And then with that, like I would say, do your first jobs for free on the weekends or for almost nothing, or just for expenses. Depends on what kind of work that you want to do, obviously, because I'm not going to say like, go do a whole shoot for like some fashion brand. Like, no, like if they're gaining from it and you're not the only one gaining from it, they should be paying part of it, right? And, usually it's friends, like I would always say, hey, if you have a friend who has a brand or a restaurant that they're starting or an Etsy shop or whatever it is, like start small and get good at small and then get bigger and then get bigger. And with that comes more and more money, right? Like my first job I remember I ever did was like a $400 budget, including film processing with my time, like everything that went into it. And I maybe made $20, once that was all done. But then I put that $20 back into like, oh, let me buy another filter for my lens or whatever it was. And then I did the next job and like, oh, I kept $100 from that one. And then I did the next job. Like it's a lot of time, right? And it's a slow, steady game. It's an ultra marathon, double ultra, Death Valley ultra marathon with, snowstorms and hot heat and everything that comes at you, but realize like you just got to keep going this way. And there is a point where like things really start to take off for anybody. It might be in 2 years, it might be in 20 years. It's hard to know. It's one, and I think a lot of times it's when you find that superpower, you find, but with that, there's also kind of a cultural timing thing where like, if your style of shooting happens to also fit with the kind of pop culture and what's going on in the world, or you find the right client that's like, oh my gosh, this is the look we want for Pepsi. Like we want you to be the Pepsi guy. And you're like, oh my gosh, oh, that's amazing. For me in catalog, I was like the guy that knew how to shoot digitally. And I knew how to, I had a good eye for styling shoes for whatever reason. And I was good at lighting and I was the right price to get started, right? So for me, like Victoria's Secret started hiring me to do catalog. It wasn't a ton of money, but it was steady and it was something I was good at. And that let me build up to the next thing. And that let me get my first studio. And then that let me, get my first, digital camera and whatever, like realize that all that history that I talked about earlier on, like through that, I was slowly building. I mean, that was over many, many years. I assisted other people for 3 years before I went off and even did my own thing on my own, but I was starting to shoot my first jobs right away. I got my first magazine jobs 3 months after moving to New York City, but it took 3 years before I had enough of those jobs where I could actually quit my day job of assisting and do it full time. So, realize that it's like, it's not about how much money you need to start. It depends on figure out what you want to start and start playing around with whatever you have before you spend any money, any business obviously takes some money to get started. But is it something that you could borrow? Is it something that a friend has a camera or your dad or whoever, just think about it that way. That's it. Good. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much. Also, if you haven't checked out the Garage Learning's website, we just updated it with a bunch of new stuff on it to find out about everything we're doing, all the kits. We're going to be sharing a bunch of more footage of the kits in action coming up in the very, very recent future, very soon, whatever that is, very soon. If you don't, the garagelearning.com, the Dash Garage TV is our production company. If you don't follow me on Instagram, Steve Giralt and Steve Giralt 6 on TikTok. It's like the new exciting thing. So thank you for everybody that joined us. Thank you again to Jägermeister for doing the Save the Night campaign. Check out on there all the other artists, all the creative people on there that are doing classes just like this in different areas. There's musicians, there's artists. It's really kind of amazing what is happening there. So with that, we'll see you next month. This is June, so we'll see you in July for another one of these on a different topic. Please send us messages if you have a specific topic that you want us to cover, because it could be anything from the technical lighting stuff to business to production to post-production, even, whatever it is. We're doing these for you. It's not for us. So the more feedback you give us, the more support you give the Garage Learning, the better, because we want to keep being able to do this for you all. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.